To Laurie Schwab with the New York Cosmos.
Johnson. Still Johnson. Jones, this looks dangerous for Brisbane Lions. Jones, a good cross. Johnson.
Arnold's forward, so's Manus Lamond, still Robbie Slater. Twisting and turning, getting that one across. Lamond! Manus Lamond!
Play on, says the referee. Hayes is onside again. Shot! It's in the net! What a great goal by Graham Hayes!
No call! Score! Salamidi for Cole. Cole on the run. Shoots. 2-0.
Lazanovsky with the free kick. Launches a rocket! Trimbali. What vision!
Bath blasts.
Yes! That's it!
Vujovic.
Beautiful goal! Here's Bozanic. They haven't! They might have won it!
Teammate from Heidelberg United and another local product, Charlie Ankus. How do you feel, Charlie?
A bit nervous, but I think I'll get used to it and really put in 100%.
We're joined today on this next interview, or next in the series of interviews that I've been doing, with the voice of SBS, the voice of Australian soccer right through the 70s and the 80s. And once we start talking, you'll recognise this voice. And what a pleasure and an honour it is to be spending some time chatting and talking about his life and his time in football. Mike Hill, welcome.
It's great to be with you, George.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, we did have a bit of a minor hiccup last week, but hopefully we're beyond all those technical issues and we're kicking goals, for want of a better expression. But it is really a pleasure and a privilege to chat to you. And for all intents and purposes, you disappeared out of our lives. And when I talk about our lives, people my age and 5 years older or 5 years younger who grew up with your voice in our lounge room, or lounge rooms, all of a sudden it felt like you disappeared, but you actually became one of our greatest football exports in some regard. When all our players were going off overseas, so did you, which I look forward to you explaining. But more importantly, we're going through an interesting period worldwide now with the pandemic of what we call COVID-19. How are you coping with that?
I'm doing fine. I mean, I've retired now, and so I'm able to watch a lot of football on television and just enjoying retirement. As you said, I went to America in 1993 with my American wife, and we spent 10 years over there. I was working for ESPN, which was a great experience. And so from the very first game of the NSL, back in 1977, which I did with Les Murray, which was Sydney Olympic against South Melbourne at the old Sydney Sports Ground, right the way through till 1993. I was involved pretty much every season. So it was great, the ebb and flow of the game, how many opportunities the game had, and how many opportunities over that period of time, and even now, are lost to the game. And it's really heartbreaking for people that have been in the game for a long, long time. Ex-players, that saw the potential and it's never realised it, and it's still not realising it.
Sadly. And where is home now for you?
It's on the Northern Beaches in Sydney, where I lived since 1977. When we went overseas, I did not sell the house and was able to come back because we always knew we would come back. So it's, just a nice little village sort of on the Northern Beaches. Very happy here.
Oh, very good. Glad that you're well. And it's especially pleasing that we can actually have a chat to you. So what we normally do, we go chronologically. We go back and delve into your childhood and to the roots and find out a little bit more about your background. Now, I've got it down as born in 49. Am I on the money there? 69. No, 49.
45.
45. I'm being kind, aren't I? All right, 45.
I know you're
40. Where were you born? And tell us about where you grew up.
I grew up in Stevenage, which is just north of London, in Hertfordshire. And my dad used to take me to watch Hitchin Town, who were an amateur side in England, quite a good one at that stage. And used to go there every Saturday or every other Saturday when they were playing at home. They used to play in the old Athenian League, which was quite a good standard for amateur football. And started going there when I was about 5 until I was 8 or 9. And then I started following Stevenage, which were actually in a lower league than Hitchin Town. But now, of course, Stevenage sort of went through all the pyramid, got a lot of investment, and are still at this stage, as of today, in the Football League. Whether they'll get relegated because they finished bottom is anyone's guess. There's so many legal battles going on. Other teams should have perhaps points deducted for not paying wages. So it's all getting very complicated. Hopefully they'll get it sorted out. But that's where I first started. My love of football was Hitchin Town. And the big thing was that one year they actually made the quarterfinals of the FA Amateur Cup. They had an away trip to Crook Town, which was out of my budget, out of my league, because it was miles and miles away, and they lost 10-1, although Crook Town went on to win the trophy at Wembley. So that were my early recollections of going to see football. I used to play for the local teams.
Yeah.
Works teams after school used to walk out, go to the public park where there was 4 or 5 pitches and just go around and see if any of the works teams were short of a player. And if they were, grab a game. Usually got put out on the left wing, although with my school team and my teams that I played for, I was a goalkeeper.
Okay.
But for these work teams, they'd usually put you out on the left wing. And all throughout the game, you'd be talked to not only by your teammates, who were men, much older, but the guy that was marking you be telling you all the way through. You learn so much. And so many of my friends used to do the same thing, because sometimes the work teams were 2 or 3 players short. You'd have 2 or 3 of my friends playing, and we'd learn so much because everybody would be talking to you. Hold the ball, come inside, just hold off a bit. And that's how you learn. And that's something that's gone now from the soccer. It's so much, all got to be in age groups, can't play with people who are older than yourself. And I think it's a deterrent to the kids. It doesn't help them. They learn more if they're playing with more experienced players. They learn from that experience.
Yeah, no.
So after that, my football career finished about 15. I did get invited to a trial up at Arsenal as a goalkeeper. Played a trial at Highbury, and but at that stage I was looking to leave school, and I got an offer as a job as a disc jockey in the local ballroom, and it completely changed my my life at that stage. I still followed football, but it was the money, the glamour of being a disc jockey in a ballroom, and at that stage it was about 1963, 64, the English explosion of English groups around the world had happened. And we started booking groups on a Wednesday night. And we had people like Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Hollies, the Kinks, Freddie and the Dreamers. And like all that whole of that British invasion, was able to work with them and watch them close up, be the disc jockey, introduce them. It was a fabulous time. And that got me the music business bug, which led me to join a company for 3 years in England, promoting and signing acts. One, the most famous one, was a group called the Equals, which was one of the first multiracial groups in England that had a #1 with Baby Come Back. And then that company was being distributed in Australia by EMI, and I used to work on a daily basis with an Australian, and he persuaded me, go to Australia, it's going to cost you 20 quid for 2 years, what an experience. So I became a £10 pom and came to Australia in 69 and worked for EMI for about 9 months, and then joined Warner Brothers, who were setting up and they just exploded because they had so many great acts. The Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, just Phil Collins, Fleetwood Mac. It was just a marvelous time. You used to see these acts because Australia then became very much on the map for tours. Queen was another one of our acts that came through. It was just marvelous seeing all these acts week in, week out. Absolutely brilliant. So although I still followed football closely, it was actually a guy called Brian Lefebvre, who was the secretary of the Federation, who actually phoned me one day, and I got to know him since I moved to Australia. I just used to meet him occasionally, have a lunch. But he phoned me and he said, "You used to be a disc jockey, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know all about football, don't you?" And I said, "Well, I think so." He said, "Channel 10 are going to cover the Phillips Soccer League." He said, "The new Phillips Soccer League that's going to start in a couple of weeks." He said, "Channel 10 are looking for a commentator. So what are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "Go to the sports ground, ask for Bob Garden." And he said, "He's the guy who's out from England, does the big match. And he's helping Channel 10 get it all set up." He said, "But they're looking for commentators." And I went out there. The game was Western Suburbs against St George. I had to call a quarter of the game, and I had to interview a guy called Manfred Schaefer, who was the St George coach. We've been friends ever since. He was really helpful to me. And Bob Garden said, "Look, next week, once you're on the show, you'll be working with a guy called Les Murray." And that was it. We met for the first time at the sports ground that day, covered that game. South Melbourne won, I think 2-0, if I remember correctly. Peter Ollerton was one of the scorers, or he might have scored both goals. I remember him scoring at least one. And that was the start of it. And then those days, there wasn't live games. There was a game covered in Melbourne, and the game covered in Sydney, and then a highlight show put together on a Saturday night on Channel 10. So that was how it all started, purely by accident. And that carried on till I went to America. It was only in America that soccer commentating became a full-time occupation at ESPN.
Okay. So we've discovered some footage recently, not that we needed the footage, but of some of those early Channel 10 days. So there was David Fordham, who may have been hosting. Does that sound right?
Yes, David used to, there was a show that was put on, he used to go on SBS, which David used to host, and he was based in Newcastle, and he covered all the Newcastle KB United games, and a great guy, and really got to know him very well. In fact, I went to the Olympics with Channel 10 in 1988 in Seoul, and David was there. I was doing the soccer, he was doing another sport. I think he was doing boxing with a guy called Billy Smith. But we had a great time. He was a great character. Loved the game, and unfortunately he's no longer with us. But they were the very early days of SBS and trying to get the sport off the ground. Yeah. And he was very much a forerunner.
He was. Hugh Johns was also bought out by Channel 10, I assume, in the early days to maybe be.
No, he was actually bought out by SBS in 1981, which was the first year that SBS covered the actual soccer league. Channel 10 had it for the first 2 years, 77, 78. 78, they started to lose interest. I think they were only putting it on initially because as it was the Phillips League, there was a deal done that Phillips would buy so much advertising on a Saturday night, which for advertisers was a dead time. So they put it on. But then they started to lose interest, and it was getting pushed back from 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. It went to, I think, 1 week, it was 1 o'clock on a Monday morning. And they just sort of lost interest. And then for a year, there was nothing on television.
Yeah.
And then SBS started in 1980. They covered the grand final. Les and Johnny Warren did that. And then 81, SBS started covering the league on a regular basis. But again, it was only highlights. Highlight shows put together on for Sunday nights. In those days, you didn't see live matches at all. The only live game we got in Australia was the FA Cup final on the ABC.
Of course,
you might get the occasional international, but not very many. None of the sports were showing the whole games. So, but then, you know, things have changed over a period of time. But those were the old days. The highlight shows, which in some cases was very good because a game could not be good, but once you cut it down to 15 to 20 minutes, it could look like a world beater.
Absolutely. With good editing, everyone can look good, can't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And in many regards, I think a lot of people found that they watched a lot of highlights of soccer through that whole season or the whole year. And when it got to FA Cup final night, because you had to sit through the 90 minutes, people's reaction would generally be, well, that was not as exciting as I would have hoped. They'd hardly sat through 90 minutes for their entire life, or, you know, that once a year, which put pressure on the FA Cup final to be a marquee game, but it was just a normal game and you had to sit through the 90 minutes. And I think in some regards, the younger generation are going back to that, where 90 minutes is too long and mini matches has become the norm, where their attention span is, and all the highlights are smack packed into one little package.
I think if you're watching a game live, the 90 minutes is okay. But once you know the result of the game, the little mini games that they're doing now, cutting them down to half an hour, is fine. You see all the talking points, you see the goals, you get a couple of interviews at the end. It makes it a nice little package. But if you're seeing a game live, you don't know the result, then you perhaps can take the 90 minutes.
No, that's fair.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah, of course. So you'd been a football fan, but you weren't passionately following, I guess, the game when you got that job in '77. How did you go about preparing for research, notes, just getting facts right? How did you go about that, and what were the resources available to you? Did Channel 10 help out? Were you left to your own resource?
No, Channel 10 didn't help out. There wasn't any researchers or anything. But the people involved in the game, and I'm talking now of coaches and some of the club presidents, were falling over backwards to try to help you. You know, they wanted everything to be a success. These were people involved in football, in soccer, because they love the game, they love the code. Nothing was too much trouble for them. And I used to phone them during the week and talk to them, the coaches, and you build up a good relationship with them. They would give me their team when I spoke to them on a Saturday for a game that was coming up on Sunday. They'd say, this is the starting 11. Don't say anything. I haven't told the players yet. But you build up that trust. And these people went out of their way to try to help. And because when the league started in 1977, this was the first league that was a national code. I mean, in the Aussie rules was played in Melbourne. It was VFL in those days.
Yes.
The NRL was only played in Sydney. There were not even Newcastle or Canberra were in the Sydney competition. Melbourne, I think the longest trip they had to do was to Geelong. Everything was so local. And all of a sudden, soccer is this 2 teams from Brisbane, 2 teams from Adelaide, a Canberra team, 4 teams from Sydney, 4 teams from Melbourne. It was sort of like revolutionary. And a lot of the Sydney people and the Melbourne people I spoke to when I was trying to research and find out things, they were so confident it was just going to be Sydney and Melbourne going to dominate it. And then all of a sudden, Adelaide City came in and surprised the world. And I think in the second season, West Adelaide actually won it.
That's right,
so,
under Jim Adam,
Yeah. And so all of a sudden, this really opened people's eyes. There's a few people I spoke to who were not Sydney or Melbourne eccentric, who knew how the lie of the land was around Australia and knew the strength in other states. And one of those people was Raleigh Rasic, because he was always saying, you've got to be careful. Adelaide are going to be a dangerous side, and they did. They came to Sydney. They trounced Marconi. They beat St George in that first season, and everybody was saying, "Hey, where are these people come from?" But when you looked at their side, they had Johnny Perrin, they had Bugsy Niskahurst, Zoran Matic was the defender, the coach was Edmund Kraft, and they were just such a joy to watch. They were playing a completely different football. the teams in Sydney had seen. I hadn't seen much football in Melbourne up until that stage, but I had seen a few games in Sydney, and it was different class completely. And it was just so exciting for a soccer person to see this sort of thing and to see that what you thought was going to be the growth of the game. It did grow, but not as much as it should have done.
Historically, I think we're one step forward, two steps back, unfortunately, and I think that's just been our bugbear for the best part of the last 40-odd years, but that's a different conversation altogether. So through this, you develop some special relationships with coaches and players and administrators, no doubt. So who perhaps, had short-term and some longer-term friendships, but would have helped you, like you said, with research and information, people bending over backwards to help. Some of those early relationships that have lasted the test of time, let us in on some of those. Share some of that.
Well, from the player's point of view and coach's point of view, I still count Raleigh Rassick as a very good friend. Manfred Schaefer, Mick Hickman, Bertie Mariani, they were soccer people. They were mad on soccer. That was the most important thing, was that game on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. Administrators, Brian Lefebvre, who really sort of got me started, Brian Emery, when he ran the Soccer Federation, and Alan Bessie was another one. Good administrators. And then the ASF, as it was then, their staff was about 3 or 4 people, not like half the football stadium who work at the Football Federation offices now. And these people, most of them were doing it because their love of the game.
Yeah.
They were never going to get make a fortune out of it. I mean, another administrator who's done a great job over this, Stephen Camas, in all sorts of different, not only with Newcastle initially, where he came out as a player, but then, administrator in Newcastle, then administrator with the National League, helping Sydney Olympic, then to this new regime who came in with the start of the A-League, where he had to teach them about football because the people that came in hadn't got a clue, and then he was promptly let go. But still had a love and deep love for the game, was very much involved behind the scenes with the guy called Harry Michaels, who he worked for some time, and got Harry, who was a soccer nut anyway, but so much involvement in promoting the game. And without him, I don't think there'd been hardly much soccer at all on SBS.
So you worked with Harry.
His own money in over the years.
You worked with Harry as well, didn't you?
Yeah, great guy, but loved football. He was in it because he loved the game. And I don't think he was never going to become rich through football. He had a couple of other hit shows that made him the money, but that money, he was putting that into football. I mean, at one stage, Wollongong were in a very bad financial situation, and he went down and put money in and got them a coach and a guy called Dougie Collins to sort of rescue the club. And that's the sort of person he was. And we can't get those sort of people involved in football at all. And they are the people that we need involved in the day-to-day running of the game, because they're successful and they will make sure the code became successful.
Yeah. So that's a few admin people, administrators and behind the scenes. You mentioned some coaches, Riley and Manfred. Let's go through some of the superstars, and there were plenty from 77 through to 93, but let's try and go chronologically, but guys that really left an impression on the field as you were as a commentator, and then perhaps a relationship off the field.
Well, I mean, the first one I got to really know well was Ralph Coates, who was out playing for St. George. He was a lovely guy, and he only came out for a few weeks, but then finished up staying for most of the season. Tottenham had signed, while he was out here, they'd signed Ozzy Ardiles and Ricky Villa, and Keith Birkinshaw sort of told him he could stay here for and carry on playing for an extra couple of months, which he did. And he was very, very good value. About that time, we had Kevin Keegan out. Malcolm McDonald was out for South Melbourne. Alan Sunderland came out for Brisbane Lions. Even the great Georgie Best came out. And what a character he was, and what a lovely person to talk to. I mean, people now don't remember him, and I suppose because he was a Northern Irish international, and unfortunately when he was playing, Northern Ireland did not have a team that was good enough to make it to the World Cup. They did so in 1958 with Danny Blanchflower and players like that, but that was just before Georgie came onto the scene, and when he was at his height, Northern Ireland just couldn't pick up another 10 players to put around him. So he's never quite got the accolades that he deserved, but what a great player.
Yeah.
And another person who I had a pleasure of interviewing, he didn't play out as a guest player, but he was out doing some coaching, was Bobby Moore, the England captain who won the World Cup. What a great person to talk to. And it was sad really, because he was out here doing coaching, he was coaching kids. And I'm saying, well, why are you doing that? Unfortunately, he'd got ripped off by a manager, and he was out here to earn some money. But what a lovely person, great stories he could tell, and nobody sort of took advantage of it. I said to a couple of clubs, you should get him along, give him, a few dollars, make him your guest speaker for a night.
Yeah.
Oh, no, nobody's interested in him. And he's the only Englishman who's ever lifted the World Cup.
Yeah.
But he was just such a great guy. And of course, we also had the New York Cosmos coming out. That was close to my heart because they were owned by Warner Brothers. And the people that run it were my bosses in America, the Erdogan brothers, Nesuhi and Ahmed Erdogan. And they were just mad soccer nuts.
Yeah.
And they came out. And I mean, there is a great team there. Pele, Beckenbauer, people like that. Dennis Stewart, Giorgio Canalia.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd remember their time down in Melbourne. I mean, they were great games.
Yeah.
Great matches. So we've had some really outstanding players that have been here as guest players. And the great thing was they only came out for 3 or 4 weeks, and they gave everything. They didn't come out to just take a holiday and that. They were always available for doing interviews. And again, I mean, we don't get that now.
Yeah, it's a bit different now. You spoke to Justin Fashanu when he was out here, and we've discovered a little bit of that footage. Your recollection of that time when he was here and of the interview itself?
Well, he was. It was his brother who was perhaps better known at that stage, John Fashanu, who played at Wimbledon. But Justin was a lovely guy, very, very pleasant to talk to. Very good player as well, very underestimated. He was playing at a pretty high level. He came out here and he played in Adelaide, and I'd gone to see him the first year he was out, just as a spectator, and he was very, very good. And then the next year I was working with SBS, and he came out and he couldn't play in the game in Sydney, but he travelled with the Adelaide side, and just had a chat with him, and he was just very pleasant. Very giving of his time. Nothing was too much trouble for him. And most of the players were like that. Kevin Keegan was another one that, you start talking to them, they just carry on. Not like you'd expect, these players, people that are sort of world class and famous names would just be, trying to brush you off. No, they all took time. They wanted to talk. And they spent time with the fans as well. And that was the other thing, was that in those days, they'd walk through to the dressing rooms, whether it be at Marconi Stadium or St George Stadium, and they would just walk in with the crowd and talk and sign a few autographs and start chatting. In fact, often the coaches had to say, come on, get in, you've got to get changed. But I found that the bigger the star, the easier they were, and the more amenable they were to trying to spread the word of football.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of stars, I don't know if it's a coincidence that at the time that Channel 10 were delving into soccer and whatever, it may be a coincidence that may be intertwined, but with some other people coming out from the UK. Michael Parkinson and Dave Allen found themselves in Australia working at that time doing their shows. I don't know if it was all a coincidence or just part of the Channel 10 or their plan of bringing in some people, but you got to mix with these people. Tell us about your time or your meetings with Parky and Dave Allen.
Well, Dave Allen, I didn't come across involved in soccer at all. But Michael Parkinson, we did an interview with him, which went on SBS. And he was out doing some shows, but he was actually out here to watch the cricket because he was a mad cricket nut. And the test matches were on. He was looking forward to the test match at Boxing Day Test in Melbourne. And that's why he was over here. But of course, he was actually doing some interviews and doing a couple of Parky shows. But I was able to interview him, and what a great experience. And another person who, it was just, can I have a quick couple of minutes with you? I think we went on for about an hour and a half just chatting and, talking about his days as a kid being taken to watch Barnsley. And like a half-time saying to his father, can we go home now? No, they've got the second half. Oh, no. But that was his start. But he did, of course, come make his name in England with a guy called Hugh McIlvenney. They wrote and they worked together on radio. But Michael actually did the first book on Georgie Best.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to him a lot about that. Because he was saying that he used to go along to Old Trafford and like the decibels would be so much higher when Manchester United were playing to what you get at every other game. Because it was all young girls screaming. And I think it was Michael Parkinson who coined the name the Fifth Beatle for Georgie Best.
Yeah, he was a big promoter of George, wasn't he?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he worked with George on George's books. But he was a great person to talk to him. It was just, again, I mean, he's now Sir Michael Parkinson, but again, he was a big star who gave his time willingly. And that seemed to be the case. The bigger the star, the easier they were to talk to. I mean, George Harrison used to live out here. He was living up near Hamilton Island. And he came into our office at Warner Brothers because he was one of our artists, and just came up to reception, and the girl on reception did not even recognize him, and he asked for the boss, which was a guy called Paul Turner, and comes in, and there's George Harrison just walking around the office. A lot of the young kids didn't even know who he was.
Yeah, oblivious. Yeah.
But he was just such an easy guy. Graham Nash was another one who spent some time out here. And they seemed the bigger the star, the more humble they were. They'd give you their time willingly.
Likewise. Speaking of stars, we had a star here at South Melbourne and Sydney Olympic coaching, Tommy Doherty. Now, he lit up a room, he lit up soccer, he was just the personality and a half. And you were lucky enough to probably call him a friend, I would imagine, and spend some time with him. What's your recollections of his time here?
Well, he was like a breath of fresh air as a coach. He took over at Sydney Olympic. He threw all the kids in, which is what he'd done at Manchester United a few years earlier. And all of a sudden, the Sydney Olympics got a team with Mark Kousas, Peter Raskopoulos, Graham Jennings, Peter Catholis. It was just young kids, and he gave them their head, and they didn't let him down. And there was another person who gave his time willingly to the game. I'm involved with the local club here, just in a little amateur club. And one night I sort of said, if you're not doing anything one evening, I'd love you to come and talk to our club. Oh, yeah, I'd love to. And no worries. He came and he did a stand-up talking about football, telling jokes. And there's people in the club in this area where I live that went there and they still remember him. And this is, you're going back to the early 1980s, 81, 82. But they still remember him, those nights with Tommy Docherty. They were great, you know. And what a character, but also a very, very good coach, very shrewd.
Yeah.
And gave of his time to all media. He realised what Australia needed to do was to take the coverage to another level. And but he was a great guy, and it was good fun interviewing him. He'd always finish up with a joke every time.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to interview at different times the three Ks, Catholis, Kousis and Kalantzis, and collectively each one spoke really highly of Tommy. And like I said, he was in some regards a human headline, and he was a personality, inverted commas, but I think he was pretty shrewd when it came to coaching and managing and handling footballers.
Oh yeah, yes he was. I mean, you mentioned the name Chris Kalantzis. I spoke to Tommy. I remember talking to him on a Saturday and getting his team because we were covering Sydney Olympic on the Sunday.
Yeah.
And gave me his team. We talked about, you know, so-and-so has recovered, so he's in. He's not playing because he's injured. And he gave me the team and the subs, and that was it. And I'm at Pratton Park, you know, an hour or so before kick-off, and I see Tommy coming through the gate and heading straight towards me. And all of a sudden, he comes in, very apologetic. Mike, I've got to apologise. I've made a change in the team. I said, oh, okay, fine. He said, a guy called Chris Kalantzis. And I looked at him and I said, who? And he said, I went and saw the kids play yesterday, under 16s or under 17s. He said, and I saw this player. He said, he's so big, he's strong and skillful. He said, I just got to put him in the team. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, he's going to be wearing the number 11, because in those days it was 1 to 11. And so he stuck him out on the left wing. And what a game he had, and what a player he turned out to be. Yeah. And this was Tommy. He'd gone because, like a lot of soccer people, if Tommy walks past a park and there's a game on, he stops and watches it.
Yeah, of course.
And he'd just gone down to watch the Sydney Olympic youth teams playing, spotted this guy, straight in the team. He said, he's big enough, he's strong enough, he's good enough, he's in. And that was his motto.
Just instinct, right? Yeah. He backed himself in to make that decision, and he was going to go by it. That's sensational, a great story. And obviously it's legend and fact in Australian football, because we know it's true. It's just sensational that someone could be plucked out of an under-16 game on a Saturday and play NSL on a Sunday. And we all know that Chris went on to have a sensational career in Greece. He was a superstar in Greece. So Tommy was not only right, he was 110% right to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a great spotter of talent. Another one who could do that was Les Scheinflug. And I mean, he has done a great job with the youth teams over the years. Never quite got the accolades that he deserves. But I mean, that 1981 side, when you're talking of Riskopoulos and Kousis, they very, very well made it through to the quarterfinals here. And then 1983, he took them to Mexico, and they did very, very well.
They did.
Those teams never let Australia down.
No, and Les was good with those young teams,
Yeah, so we've had some very good coaches. We've got some very good coaches here. Unfortunately, Les got pushed to the scrap heap because of politics, and the same with Raleigh. I mean, we qualified for the first time ever in 1974. We weren't disgraced. The only teams that beat us were the eventual world champions, West Germany, and the only team they lost to, which was East Germany. We come back. You think, well, this is the start of football. We can really kick on from here. And what do? His face doesn't fit the suits, and he's out. And then we go through a lot of coaches over the years, and that stayed like that until Frank Rock came in the early 80s. And
Tell us about Frank. You were close with Frank.
Yeah, he was a character. Again, he loved the game. He was a player's coach. He worked hard. Nothing was too much trouble for him. Again, another one who understood that the game needed publicity. And he got the best out of players. He wasn't what I can say a technical coach. He didn't talk the talk, but he found the players who would run through a wall for him, and he got that team of misfits. I mean, when he first named his squad, all the media were all up in arms. What's he buying him for? What's he playing here? But that team gelled so well together. And he made John Cosmina the captain, which everybody thought was strange. Cosy turned out to be a great captain, great leader, but he led by example. And none of the players knew they would be able to get away with anything with Cosy. He was strict. He took that captaincy very, very seriously. Pardon me. So, but that was a great squad of players. And the person who really helped Frank, who got Frank the job, was a guy called Peter Sheehan, who'd come in as a marketing person at the ASF, brought in West End as a sponsor, and then really persuaded them to employ somebody like Frank Harrock. And he got this team of Frank Harrock and Eddie Thompson. And this guy who knew nothing about football, his first tour was England, and they gave the rights to Channel 7 because they thought that would be the godsend. England, Channel 7, the game's going to explode, which it didn't, of course, because Channel 7, although they had the rights, you know, putting it on late at night and the coverage was really substandard. But he organised a world tour in conjunction with Frank Harrock in 1984. We were going to play China in what was then the Ampol Cup. It was the first. We were going to have an annual event against China. And then we were going to do a tour of England. And Peter Sheehan wanted SBS to send over a camera crew, which they did. Me as a commentator. Although they couldn't show the games live because they hadn't got the money to be able to do multi-camera coverages, but every game was covered with one camera so that Frank could always watch a video of the game. But they could put highlights on the news. And at the end of the tour, Les put together a nice documentary because he was on the tour with me. And after each game, Les would do an interview with Frank or one of the players. And then it'd be spliced up into just a little package, just to keep football on the news each night on SBS. But this tour, organised by this guy that all the soccer experts thought was an intruder, he organised this tour, and we played Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, on a Tuesday night in November in Glasgow. 12 months later to that very night, or the very date, which was a Wednesday, we were playing Scotland in a World Cup qualifier at Hampden Park. And the whole tour, these people, or this guy who knew nothing about football, had organised it so that whoever we came up against, the players would be accustomed to what they would meet. And the weather that night in Glasgow when we played Rangers, who we lost against, and against Scotland 12 months later, was identical. The temperature was the same, everything. It was just, and these were people who really did get sort of put down by the soccer elite in some cases, or they think they're soccer elite. You know. But that was what Frank and his planning was. 12 months before we would have played Scotland, and we didn't know we were going to play them then because we hadn't even started the qualifiers. But Frank was thinking ahead, and he kept saying to me, "We'll be there. We'll be there. I don't know who we're going to have to play yet, but we'll be there." And we had to get through Oceania, including Israel. Frank was so super confident. And talking of confidence, the Israelis were confident because when we went to Israel for the first leg, and again I went with Johnny and Les, and we were talking to the counterparts from Israel, they were so confident, even the commentary team had actually booked their hotels for the games in Glasgow. because we knew when the games were going to be. They were so confident. No way. I mean, they had Ronnie Rosenthal, they had Harvey Cohen, they had a lot of household names, players who were playing regularly in Europe.
Yep.
And but Frank said all along, we're going to beat them. We're going to beat them. And we did. We beat them in Tel Aviv, and then drew the return leg in Australia. But again, it was this forward thinking, this forward planning. And unfortunately, we fell at the hurdle against Scotland. But that was a game that was so near yet so far. I mean, Jim, the goalkeeper, I forget his name now, Jim Layton. Jim Layton, yeah. Best game he ever played for Scotland. And if you talk to John Cosmina and ask him, Cosy will still tell you he does not know how he stopped one of his shots because he thought it was in.
Yeah, it was that header from the far post that he put back across his body, and yeah, well, I don't know how he did it either. And really, since that day, he's been known as Bloody Jim Layton, really.
Yeah, and Jimmy Patikas went very close.
And Ojarkov went very close. Yeah, and Mitchell went very close.
Yeah, it was just one of those days. I mean, and it was just...
Kenny Murphy had a blinder. He was running the midfield. It was just... We should have won that game. It was just crazy that we didn't win that. Even to say 1-0, to say that we won the second leg. You know what I mean? Like, we deserved.
But I think if it hadn't have been Jock Stein passing away before we played them, and Alex Ferguson coming in, I think if Jock Stein had been there, we would have got through. Because on that World Tour I was telling you about, our opening game was against Manchester City at Main Road.
Yeah.
And me and Les were sitting there, and sat behind us to watch the game was Jock Stein and Bob Paisley, the Liverpool manager. They were sitting behind watching the game, just looking at who Australia had got. We actually won that game at Main Road, 3-1 against Manchester City. And Jock Stein afterwards, I started talking to him and Bob Paisley, and he said, "Oh, yeah, you got some decent players." He said, "But he said they're only part timers." He said they won't. He said, if we do have to play Australia, I can't see any problems. When Ferguson took over, it was different. He had people out here watching them weekly, all the players, and reporting back to him. I think he knew as much about the Australian team as Frank Harrock did in the end, because there was a lot of Scottish players out here that were filing stories back.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
and rightly so.
A couple of us Scottish players actually approached SBS to say, "Can we get some footage of these players? Ferguson, come on,
Crazy times. So you went on that tour, which would have been a highlight, and in '85, before the World Cup qualifiers, we had some tourists. We had Manchester United out here, Iraklis, Juventus, Nottingham Forest, and Rangers. It was a who's who of European football. You would have worked on that with the Australia A and Australia B squad.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah, they were great and very important games as well. And again, it was organised by this person who was not a football man, according to the experts. But they were so important because it gave Frank, in fact, we had an A and a B team running out there. Eddie Thompson used to look after the B team and Frank was looking after the A team. And, the B team was grooming the players to come through. And those sort of games were so important. We don't get those now because we've now got to play internationals.
Yeah.
Pardon me. But in those days, we couldn't get internationals, not internationals that would pull a crowd in. So therefore, we'd bring out teams from Europe. And those games were so educational for our players because they were exposed all of a sudden to full-time professionals.
Yeah.
And the teams that came out did the right thing because they always came out with their stars. They brought their stars out. They played them. And the whole thing, it just gave a buzz and a good buzz to the game. And that was 85. And then we played a couple of games against China for the Ampol Cup. We'd gone there in 84, as I said. 85, we played a game in Brisbane. And this is where, I don't know if Frank Rock is psychic or anything. Halfway through the second half, he takes off Terry Greedy and he brings on Jeff Oliver as the goalkeeper. And I'm there with Johnny Warren and Les Murray, and we're scratching our heads. What's Frank doing? You know, Johnny was my co-commentator. He said, I can't see Terry Greedy might not have, hasn't got injured or anything. I don't know what Frank's playing at. As it was, a couple of days later, we took off for Israel. We went in, stopped in Greece, in Athens for a couple of days, and then went on to Tel Aviv. And as so happened, Terry Greedy got injured in the first leg and had to get carried off.
Friendly fire too. He got kicked by Graham Jennings.
Yeah. But Jeff Oliver, because the season had finished like 6 or 7 weeks earlier, he comes on and he played a blinder.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just think...
Well, there was a method to Frank's madness, wasn't there?
Yeah, yes. And, I mean, both Johnny Warren and myself were saying afterwards, and Les, we were just chatting, saying, are you sure he's not psychic? You know, how would you know that Terry Greedy, who never missed a game because of injury, would get injured in his most important game? And the goalkeeper, who hadn't played for 2 or 3 months, had played a week or so earlier, just to sort of, and it was just things like that. It's little silly things that you remember on these tours.
Yeah. Well, effectively for 84, the overseas tour, and whoever came here, 85 with the European teams coming here and the World Cup. That period, Frank had turned the Socceroos effectively into a club side. He had his first 11, his own first 11 in his mind, who were the strongest first 11. And he would have probably an apprentice or a backup in each of those positions and strategically give them opportunities to prove themselves. And if they didn't live up to it, like Jeff did against China, they would probably be out and the next person would be in. But he would give you opportunities to prove yourself so that when a Tel Aviv moment would occur, he could call on you. And I think Graham Arnold and Oscar Crino and the likes all waited for their opportunity. Robbie Dunn was another one who took a while to break into the team. But for all the eccentricities publicly that Frank portrayed, which I think was more an image thing that he did, behind the scenes, his plan of what he did with the Socceroos for that period was sensational.
Oh, yeah, meticulous planning, and he followed players, and I mean, it was just so good. And I mean, we came up with some excellent results in that time. Beating of Argentina in the Bicentennial Cup. You know, that was just a great night. I was fortunate enough to be there. It was just marvellous, that Charlie Yankos guy. I still remember. But
he's still
he most probably is, you know. Mind you, I mean, if I bumped into him in a pub, I'd buy him a drink because of that goal anyway. I think a lot of people are like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't only with Frank. I mean, 85, you know, we had a World Youth Championship in Russia. And Andy Kotska, Chris Kalansis, and players like that went over there. It was all the forerunner. It was all building up. And it was those years towards before I went to the States, but some of the so-called golden generation was starting to come through in the youth teams. In those days, you cover an NSL game, there'd usually be a youth game beforehand, and you'd start seeing some of these youth players. And it was just marvellous to see players coming through. I remember, you know, towards the end before I went to the States, Paul Ocon was making a name for himself at Marconi, 16 or 17-year-old. Ned Zelic had broken through, firstly with Canberra and now with the Socceroos.
Yeah.
And this was like the start of that golden generation. Mark Viduka was playing youth football with the Melbourne Croatia. And it was great in 2006. But again, another missed opportunity. We qualified for the World Cup, and the game implodes from within. All of a sudden we put a rugby person in charge of the game, and then he doesn't work out, so we put an AFL person in charge of the game. They don't work out. Let's put an NRL person in charge of the game. We've actually got somebody there now who's has actually played the game, which is revolutionary. I'm surprised we didn't get a cricket person. It's just the, and there are people in the game that just do not get the chance. And that, I think, is a crying shame. And even now with the coaching and everything, we've got great coaches out there and players who want to impart their knowledge. But they've got to go on these stupid coaching courses. I mean, I've got a grandson who's 7. If you want to coach his 7-year-old team, you've got to go to a coaching course.
Ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
but it creates revenue as well. So that's another podcast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Revenue, whatever. Let's jump ahead now. I did mention earlier, for all the work you did, and there's just games and your famous Robbie Slater twisting and turning and Manus Lamond, and it all started there with Graham Jennings. These are all these memories that I've got of your voice or your sound bites that keep popping up in my head, which is,
got a better memory than I've got, George.
Trust me, there's a lot of other geeks out there who live off those sound bites and just remember them like, I think I mentioned it to you when we were chatting on the phone. It's like hearing an old song, one of your old favourite songs, that transports you back to that place and you feel good. And when we hear your voice or we hear you commentating or a soundbite of any sort, it's like listening to one of those classical songs. So you played an important part in many people's lives, Mike. So that's why I'm chatting to you. But you did disappear. And I think I've told you, if I had $1 for every time someone asked me, where is Mike Hill? And my first response is always, I don't know. And my second response is, why are you asking me? I don't know the man other than having listened to him on TV or seen him on TV. We're not friends. We don't know each other. We didn't go to school together. We didn't even go to different schools together. But I keep getting this question. So when I finally found out that you had moved abroad, that kind of made some sense. But for a long time, we were wondering, what the bloody hell happened to Mike Hill? So tell us, what happened to Mike Hill?
Well, my wife, who's American, her parents were getting on. They used to come out and visit us. Unfortunately, they got old and her father got sick and couldn't travel. And so we decided, well, we've got 3 young kids. Let's go to America. Let's give them a bit of an education over there. And so we decided we'd go to the States. And that's where we went. I thought I might stay with Warner Brothers and get a job with Warner Brothers in America. But an opportunity came up to perhaps work in soccer over there. And that came up because in 1990, went with the Australian team to South Korea for the President's Cup. And one of the teams we had to play was the United States.
Yeah.
And their tour leader was a guy called Walt Barr, who had actually played in the American side in 1950, who had beaten England in the World Cup. And we got talking and everything else. And I said, I might be coming to the States. My wife and myself had discussed it. And he said, if you do, you'll have to look me up. And anyway, a couple of months later, when we were back here in Australia, he phoned me and he said, I'm in Australia for a few days. We're having a holiday. Love to catch up with you and love to see an Australian match. So I said, okay, well, I'm doing one this afternoon or Saturday afternoon at Melita Stadium. And then on Sunday, I'm doing a game at Marconi. So I said, if you want, you can come to either of them or both of them. So he said, I'll come with both of them, So anyway, I arranged to pick him up, took him out to Melita Stadium. And he was very impressed with the little setup that Melita had. Not a big stadium, but nicely. It had been built by the members, little bar underneath where they were making some money. Very impressed. And then the next day I took him to Marconi. And he was just, wow. Couldn't believe it. Marconi had that beautiful club, but they'd developed the ground. They had the car park there. And on the way home, I stopped by and I said, I'll show you another ground, because he kept raving about these grounds. And I showed him the Denza Park, which Sydney, Croatia at that time was developing. And he was so impressed. He was impressed with our football and the passion of the fans, because although they weren't huge crowds, the fans were passionate. You know, Marconi and Melita fans were as well. Anyway, when I got to America, I phoned him and sort of said, I'm over here now. And he said, oh, great. I'd love you to come and come to a meeting with me next week. Can you come to Boston? I said, yeah, you know. And so decided to go up to Boston, drove up there. I wasn't too far from where I was living, and was able to meet him. And he said, got a meeting because we're talking about the start of the MLS, a new league that we're going to do. The old NSL and closed down. He said, but I'd like you to come and just talk to some of the owners. He said, I've been trying to explain to them about what you've done in Australia, where the clubs own their own ground. And I said, oh, okay. And I went along, met some very, very nice people, and sort of answered a few questions, because the Americans always want to do everything big. The guy from the Metro Stars, or was New York side, it was the New York Metro Stars, and they say, oh, we're going to be big like the Cosmos were, and we'll need Giant Stadium, and that's 77,000. That might not even be big enough for us. Well, the New York Cosmos might have sold it out, but when you've got Pele, you've got Beckenbauer, you've got Giorgio Canali, you've got a team of household names, you can sell it out. Metro Stars, they had Donadoni. That's it, Donadoni. That's one. And I think for their first couple of games, because it was a novelty, they got 24,000, which for television's point of view looked terrible when you got 23,000 in a 70,000 seat stadium. You can't convince the Americans that this is a great game when it's all full of empty seats. And the only club that did really well and looked good on television was the Columbus Crew, because they were going to play, they were a new club, and they were going to play out of the Columbus University, which again, like all these university stadiums, are all 60, 70, 80,000 seater. But they decided they were going to build their own little stadium, 20,000 seats. And when they put their games were on television, they looked great. It looked like you were watching a European game. And so in a lot of cases, Australia really set the what I'm trying to say, the
standard or the scene.
The print for the Americans to go ahead. And it wasn't long after that the LA team built the Home Depot Stadium, because they were playing in the Rose Bowl, which held over 100,000. And then even in New York, they got new owners, and they changed their name anyway from the Metro Stars, but they built a little purpose-built stadium in Harrison in New Jersey, and they hold about 27,000, because the one thing they realized was that if you're going to play Manchester United or Barcelona or Real Madrid midweek, you can go and rent Giant Stadium. You can afford to rent it. But when you're only getting 20, 22, 23,000 and you're paying the rental, you're not making any money out of the car parking, you're not making any money off of the catering, but you're paying a rental, and then you have to pay for the cleaning, then you've got to pay for the security staff. It's not very much money. Whereas if you can keep all that money in the club, and that's one of the things that disappointed me when the A-League started here, was that this old soccer, new football. I mean, this old soccer, some of these clubs had built some nice little boutique stadiums, which would be fine. You know, Sydney FC and Western Sydney Wanderers, if they get 20 or 30,000, that's great. Well, if you got 20,000 or 18,000 in Marconi, it would look fantastic. And if you are going to get a huge crowd, then you go and rent the football stadium and get 40,000. But why pay for that week in, week out? And I think we missed a great opportunity then. But again, it comes back to the people not understanding, not knowing the game.
No, that's fair enough. And you make a good point. More importantly, your time overseas was not only just helping them set up and making them see the light. You actually did a fair bit of commentary while you were over there. Tell us about how that evolved and what it entailed.
Well, I was working at ESPN, which when I got there, I was surprised. The first weekend I was there, I watched a game on ESPN. It was a local American game. I think they were playing some team from Central America. It finished up 2-2, 4 goals in the game. The game was being shown live. Not one goal got shown live because he's shown like it's a corner for the Americans. They go to a commercial break. You come back and the Americans are 1-0 up. They didn't have people that understood or felt for the game at all. But anyway, ESPN, I was working for their international division, which went to about 164 countries around the world. And of course, for international, they wanted football. The domestic didn't want football. They were even annoyed that they were going to have to show the World Cup in 1994 until they realized how big it was. But at that stage, the Americans' football did not exist. But for the international audience, ESPN wanted international football. And that's where I was doing the commentary for. It was a fabulous experience. We did the Champions League. We had the Dutch League, and that's when the Dutch League really was a great competition before the Bosman ruling, and they lost all the great players out of Holland. We did Serie A and we did La Liga. And Sunday used to be my busiest day. Because of the time difference, I'd have to go in on Sunday morning and do the Dutch game. And then Sunday afternoon be the Italian game. And then late Sunday afternoon, early Sunday evening, the Spanish game. All live, all off of a monitor. And I came back here in 2002 for a holiday and bumped into Eddie Thompson, who was actually coaching at that stage, or had been coaching up in Japan. And he looked at me. He said, "You come back on your frequent flyer miles, haven't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I was watching you the other week." He said, "And there you were in Holland. The next hour later, you're in Milan. And then an hour after that, you're in Barcelona." He said, "Those flights," I mean, he was saying it tongue in cheek. But it was just an unbelievable experience and great football to watch. And some great Champions League games over the years. And we used to do the English Premier League on a Monday night as well. We'd put the voice on for the world. And that was great, doing the Premier League. Although, again, the one thing ESPN did not understand it, we lost the rights to the Premier League. And a couple of us, soccer people, were really upset. And the boss sort of said, "What are you worried about? We've lost, the Premier League." And I said, "Yeah, I'm upset. It's one of the best leagues in the world, and we've lost it." He said, "Yes, but we've signed the Scottish League." I said, "They don't even watch that in Scotland, I said, "Unless you've got Rangers and Celtic, that's the only game that's going to draw an audience around the world. People aren't going to get up in the early hours of the morning in Asia to watch East fight against Partick Thistle." He said, "No, it's football. It's only football." And I remember arguing and saying, "Well, so if you lost the NFL, you'd go and sign the Canadian League?" And he said, "Oh, no, nobody would watch it." I said, "Exactly."
Crazy. So you were lucky enough in that period to obviously get a World Cup to work at, the 1994 World Cup. Tell us about that experience.
Well, in America, it was a great experience because of being such a multicultural society. The Americans could not understand how big that was. I mean, every game was a sellout. And I think there was one game, Morocco against Saudi Arabia. It was played in New York. And they got 70,000 people there. It's unbelievable. But then it wasn't a surprise because in the build-up to the World Cup, they started putting friendlies on a giant stadium. And you'd get somebody like Brazil against El Salvador or Mexico against Guatemala. And they'd be packed out. You couldn't get a ticket for love or money. 70,000.
Yeah.
And on a Wednesday night, I mean, not even at weekends, they played them nights at midweek. It really caught the imagination. And the worst thing that happened in the World Cup was the O.J. Simpson trial, or the O.J. Simpson, the murders, because up until then, because the World Cup had surprised everybody, it was the lead stories on all the news, the CNNs, the ABCs, everything. And then all of a sudden this O.J. Simpson came, and that was the only thing people were talking about. I mean, they were cutting away from matches to film the car chase of him. You know, it just stopped it.
Classic
I mean, you still got your die-hard fans who had bought the tickets, were going to go, but you just lost out on the fans who are just getting involved in it, because the interest was building all the time, and that sort of put a kibosh on it. And then in 1988, I was fortunate enough, I went to France to cover that World Cup and covered some great matches, the semi-final, Brazil and the Netherlands, the quarterfinal, Argentina against the Netherlands. Some great football in that World Cup. Colombia against England, David Beckham getting sent off against Argentina. It was just so many great games. The first one I did there was Chile and Italy, which was a marvellous game. That was a great World Cup, and that got a good audience in America as well. Although the timing was a little bit awkward, but that got good ratings. And by then, the MLS had also was growing, and so the Americans did it right. They tried to sort of build up their own team on the back of the World Cup, whereas we used the World Cup and then it's gone. But they were very good at trying to sort of tie the whole thing together and get the MLS to go on the coattails of the World Cup. And I mean, the MLS is now up to, 28, 29 teams. They've got more teams coming in next year.
Yeah.
And they've done it right. And we should be learning from it, because we are more of a football nation, a soccer nation, than the Americans are. Yeah. But we've missed our chances. And we're still missing them.
Yeah. You're very fortunate in some regards. You're a pioneer with 77, part of the NSL at the beginning. Pioneered again, the right time, right place when you went over for the MLS. You were there for there. So you kind of went on two separate journeys, but kind of similar journeys, which I'm sure both of those products benefit from having your experience and expertise and that golden voice etched in the memories and etched in the sound bites, as we talked about. But just to reflect, I'm going to ask you about promotion and relegation, but just to reflect now with what you know and what you've been through and the good experiences of both those journeys and just general journey life itself. What does today, I'll rephrase that, what does today's Mike Hill tell the 1969 Mike Hill with the the benefit of hindsight? What does Mike Hill in '69 still come to Australia, do you think?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, that's been a great move, and yeah, definitely. I think the only disappointment is that we have missed opportunities over here. We have not taken advantage of the opportunities that football has had here, and too many people are involved in the game who are involved for the wrong reasons. That is my biggest bugbear. That's that there are good people who can't get their foot in the door, and some of the decisions that the people in authority take are completely wrong, and often the wrong people get blamed. I mean, there was a lot of criticism of Frank Lowy the second time he came, or when he came in just after I got back here in 2003. But you've got to remember, Frank Lowy and Alex Pongrass were the two people who were the brainchild of getting the old NSL up and running in 1977. And Frank is a mad soccer nut. always has been. When I was up in '88, he was he'd just bought out Channel 10, and he was coming in the studios to watch Australia play games. Because one of their games was down in Busan, and a couple were in towns out of Seoul. But Frank was such a soccer nut. He wanted to see. I mean, here's the guy who owns Channel 10, but he wanted to see the soccer. And I think when he came back into the game, a lot of people expected he's got a magic wand. Well, he was a businessman. He couldn't devote 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to running Australian football. And he did what he felt was the best at the time. Only in hindsight it was wrong. But so many of his things that he's done in his life, so successful he was with Westfield and places like that. He made a mistake by bringing in a rugby person who just did not understand the game and whose thinking was completely wrong. I remember watching an interview with him when they were saying, well, there was only going to be like 6 teams to start, and we've got to keep cut down, and there can only be so many players in the squad. And well, why can't we have more teams? This wasn't me, but somebody asked the question, why can't we have more teams and play midweek matches? Oh, you know, if you play midweek matches, you've got to have a different squad. Well, that's the rugby thinking, because when the Wallabies, the Australian rugby team, used to go over to Europe at the end of each season, they would take like 30 odd players, because they'd play a test match at the weekend. Midweek, they'd play teams, you know, like provincial teams.
Yeah.
So, and they would play Ireland, they play Wales, they play Scotland, they play France, they play England. So you got 5 internationals, then you got 5 provincial games midweek. You'd have a couple of warm-up games. So they'd be taking like 32 players with them. Well, because the players didn't back up or couldn't back up in those days. Whereas with football, you ask most players, they'd be very willing to play a second game a week, then do a second training session.
Yeah.
So that was a missed opportunity. But I mean, Frank's heart was always in the right place, but he got he thought he was doing the right thing, and it sounded very good, this guy's credentials, but they weren't football people. And I think that was an opportunity missed. But that's the only thing that really has been a really main concern to me. And I follow Facebook. I see all the old players, the Gary Coles, they're still involved. They're still passionate about the game. Peter Catholis is another one who tries to go out and coach kids, but they're not going to go and do a coaching course by somebody who's learned the game out of a book. And you know,
I don't want to go there because we could talk about that for days. I'm going to ask you specifically, and Peter Catholis is a good man and he is on the right track. Promotion and relegation, where do you stand on that for the A League?
Well, we had it in the old NSL, if you remember. I think the problem is with no promotion, no relegation, is that if you're finishing bottom, who cares?
No consequences, yeah.
No consequences. And in America, the way they do it there with the American sports, if you finish at the bottom, you get the first draft pick. It's advantageous. And so you see teams in the NFL and sometimes in the baseball, if they're having a bad season,
start tanking.
Yeah, just tank it down, and that means you get the draft pick. I mean, drafting is foreign to soccer. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world, only in American college systems. But no, I mean, we've seen it with Central Coast Mariners. They were a great club. They were a shining light under Laurie McKenna when they started. Graham Arnold carried it on. And then they got new owners who didn't want to put any money in it. And they've had not second-rate coaches. They've had coaches who are good. But if you haven't got the players, it doesn't matter how good a coach you are. You know, you can't make brilliant players out of average players. And I think that if there was some consequences for finishing bottom, and Central Coast, a good chance they're going to finish bottom again, which will be what, for 3 years on the trot? Well, where's the incentive for them to do anything? And also, if the owner now wants to get rid of them, who's going to buy a team that's finished bottom for 3 years, knowing that you've really pretty much got to go out and get a whole new squad? And I mean, there's no criticism of Alvin's statute. I think he's done a great job there. They are playing a lot better than they were, but he hasn't got anything to work with.
No.
And so I think I would like to see the National League, or the A-League as it's now called, expanded to 14 or 16 clubs, so every team plays each other home and away once. It wouldn't worry me if they kicked Wellington out, because what happens if Wellington win it? The Australian champions come from New Zealand. I mean, it's, but that's beside the point. But I think we should have a league of 16 teams, and then promotion and relegation. Team who finishes bottom goes back into the state league from where, from their area, and the state league champions from around Australia, and the ones who want to go into move the next step up, they go into a playoff, and the winner of that goes into the A-League. But you've got to win your way in, not buy your way in. You've got to win it on the field. So you have the New South Wales champions, Victoria, Brisbane, Adelaide, all their champions. They have a mini tournament. Team who wins it, they replace the team who finished bottom. And it doesn't matter, people say, well, you can't have all these teams from Sydney or Melbourne. There's no guarantee that a Sydney or Melbourne team would win that playoff.
No.
There's no guarantee a Sydney or Melbourne team would finish bottom.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think it would add more excitement. I think the one thing the A-League has become is rather boring these days. I mean, I know this season has been missed because of the coronavirus, but up until then, I mean, you're playing the same teams every 3 or 4 weeks. It just
become jaded, hadn't
it? Yeah, and whereas if you had a 16-team league, that's 30 games, 15 home, 15 away, you get some excitement. Whereas every 5 or 6 weeks now you're playing the same team, and it's not fair, because some team you'll play twice at home or twice away, whereas having a team, you play every team home once, every team away once, and that to me is the way it should be. And promotion relegation, I think, it just adds so much life to it.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. I've got to agree with you. Now, you've been so kind in giving me so much of your time, and there's a footnote there. You've given me twice so much of your time, which I really, really do appreciate. We've finally got over our tech difficulties, so fingers crossed this will turn into a terrific online interview, and I'm sure it will. I wish you well going forward. All good health for you and the family. Enjoy. Hopefully we will stay in touch and continue to converse, because obviously, as per our phone calls, we could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles on our favourite subject, which is always a terrific thing to find other football people to talk football with. Congratulations on a sensational career, footballing especially, because that's obviously where we're highlighting, both here and abroad as an export. When all our players were going overseas, you went overseas and were an Aussie doing it overseas. That no one knew.
So proud when I was covering the English Premier League and covering Leeds United with Harry Kewell and Mark Paducah.
I bet you
Australian.
I bet you would. Yeah, heart would have been pumping. So, even as a Liverpool supporter, I used to like watching Leeds purely to watch those two boys go around. And well done again, mate, on a fantastic career. And long may you stay healthy and well. And I really, really do appreciate you taking up so much of your time to chat to me. And I'll leave you with the last word.
Well, it's been my pleasure, George. I've enjoyed it. It's nice reminiscing. And as I say, we've got a great history of Australian football. It's got to be told. And, we've got to start utilising the people that have been there and done that in the game and get them in positions of authority so the game can grow. Because at the moment, I'm a little bit worried about how far it's going to go. It's not kicking ahead as I believe it should do. And we've got the people to do it. Let's do it. Let's all get on the same page and pull in the same direction.
Well said, Mike. You're a star. Thank you.
Thanks, George.